Hi everyone here and around the world. I've got chocolate with me tonight, and we broke through 212,000 subscribers this week. Thank you all so much. Feel that digital hug from me. Tonight I have an update from my aerospace source about what happened to his Gmail and Proton mail on June 9th that disconnected us. He was working in his private Gmail when a message with attachment popped in. He clicked on it, and immediately this green 4chan text popped in referencing OPRP and the dangers of time manipulation. Simultaneously, his Proton mail would not open. Proton tech support tried to help, but all he got was, quote, "account scheduled for deletion," close quote. Today, in a new Proton mail, he said, quote, "I am still perplexed about why this cryptic screen grab was sent to me. I had never heard of 4chan before," close quote. Well, neither had I. I had never seen 4chan before this puzzling June interference. 4chan is a UK website begun in 2003 to be wholly anonymous. Earthfiles viewer Stefan Y. found that OPRP, quote, "is a method of developing risk forecasting and early warning and a prerequisite program responsible for controlling a significant hazard," close quote. Associated with these three titles are Operational Prerequisite Program, Open Protocol Resource Project, Outbreak Prevention and Response Plan, close quote. In this case, the significant hazard discussed was time manipulation and control technology. So what were those closing words? Blue Eisenhower November signaling. When I searched them, I found this Eisenhower Blues record label, copyright April 1954, by J.B. Lenore for an album entitled The Mojo, when Eisenhower had been president for only about a year. The music video entitled Blue Eisenhower November that I showed you last week was licensed in 2001 by Believe Music and featured the 1954 voice track of Eisenhower Blues. It was found by Earthfiles viewers Gina and Stefan Y, and we assumed the Ike and alien image was photoshopped. But why was it in the Blue Eisenhower November music video? Here is the photoshopped image of President Eisenhower on the right and a gray type E.T. on the left. And here is the original photograph of Eisenhower shaking hands with Richard Nixon that we found in the Bridgman Art Culture History website. But here it is flipped. So Ike is on the right where Nixon was, and then for the 2001 music video Blue Eisenhower November, produced by Believe Music, Nixon and plane and sky are turned black and the gray humanoid superimposed on the left. So Blue Eisenhower November is like a clue in a game where the original evidence and facts are buried so deep in the black layers of government secrets that nothing is ever officially, publicly announced. That's why I talked last week about the CIA allegedly having a long-time agreement with the National Enquirer to put real or photoshopped images on its never-trusted pages, so readers can be conditioned about controversial UFO and ET news without shock. There have been rumors since 1954 that President Eisenhower met E.T.s, either Greys or Nordics or both, and maybe even signed a treaty for the United States to stop exploding atomic bombs in exchange for advanced alien technology, and perhaps some access to animals and humans, but only a few news bits can be found, such as this 1982 quote, Presidential X-Files, Ike and the Aliens, in February of 1954, President Dwight Eisenhower took a trip to Palm Springs, California, for what was officially said to be a winter holiday, close quote. And here is a 1982 UK headline, quote, "The incredible story they tried to hide for 28 years. Ike met space aliens," close quote. They are talking about the February 1954 rumor that President Eisenhower made a trip to Palm Springs, California, to go to Edwards Air Force Base, 99 miles to the northwest, to meet with one or more alien beings, an event allegedly covered by a trip to a dentist for a cracked tooth. For some historic perspective, I called Paul Blake Smith, who was born and raised in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and he was exposed to rumors that a UFO with cloned bodies was retrieved near his hometown in the spring of 1941, probably in April. 6 years ago, in 2016, Paul released his research in this book, Mo 41, The Bombshell Before Roswell, where he presents his case for a UFO crash and retrieval near Cape Girardeau before the U.S. entered World War II, and 6 years before the world would hear about flying disc crashes near Roswell, New Mexico. Paul's website is www.mo41.info, Mo standing for Missouri, and 41 for 1941. That research exposed Paul to the rumors of President Eisenhower meeting one or more extraterrestrial beings at Edwards Air Force Base on February 19, 1954. In November 2020, he released President Eisenhower's Close Encounters, an investigation into Eisenhower's secret agreement with extraterrestrials, published by foundationbooks.net, to good reviews on Amazon. Paul is also the author of JFK and the Willard Hotel Plot, released in 2018, that has new information about the Kennedy assassination. All of Paul's books can be purchased in paperback or digital from Amazon.com. An audiobook version of his President Eisenhower book is also available at tantormedia.com. So, this past weekend, I asked Paul what he thinks is the strongest evidence that President Eisenhower met with one or more aliens in 1954 at Edwards Air Force Base near Palm Springs, California. And did he sign a treaty with Greys, with Nordics, both, or something else?
Well, I believe that the many stories and circumstantial evidence that I have gathered for my book is a true story that said that President Eisenhower traveled to Edwards Air Force Base late at night to meet in a prearranged meeting with extraterrestrials. And it's something that's been hit upon by a UFO writer and investigator named Cristoforo Barbato, who has worked in Rome, Italy, and he's written many articles and has spoken at UFO conventions, and he even got to meet Colonel Philip Corso before he passed away in the late 1990s. Well, Mr. Barbato began receiving information in emails from a mysterious source, and it was in 2001 that this man began to tell him, "I work in the Vatican, and have I got a secret for you?" Said that the Vatican learned in 1954 that President Eisenhower met with some friendly human-like extraterrestrials at Edwards Air Force Base. In my book, I say, Mr. Barbato received this sensitive insider information from a Jesuit priest who was working inside the Vatican. Much of the resulting shocking data accumulated led to Barbato putting together a controversial 2006 article and book called The Omega Secret, highlighting the lowdown from those high up in the Vatican. The unnamed source supposedly told Chris that it was his understanding that Cardinal James Francis McIntyre of California did indeed go to Edwards Air Force Base and witness extraterrestrial beings himself, apparently right alongside President Eisenhower on February 19, 1954. It was stated further that Francis McIntyre was so moved by this dramatic experience, he quickly flew to Rome, Italy, despite being warned not to tell anyone. He spoke directly to Pope Pius XII, who died in 1958. He briefed the Pope about the shocking E.T. situation and being sworn to secrecy. In fact, along the way, McIntyre was warned by nervous U.S. government officials to keep his mouth shut, but ultimately refused this order. According to Barbado's information, the Cardinal was part of a delegation with the President in a prearranged landing event, a kind of welcoming committee, waiting patiently, perhaps even for days, waiting for the aliens to show up. As promised, they did so, and the President was called and advised to come on in, that they were friendly, and he did so.
In that meeting with Cardinal Francis McIntyre that was described in the Omega Secret, that meeting was at Edwards Air Force Base. It was with President Eisenhower. The date was February 19th, 1954. Cardinal Francis McIntyre was there. The Pope's Secret Information Department, known as SIV, was there. Did Cardinal McIntyre or Barbado, did they talk ever in any book or speech about the details of what occurred in that meeting?
I'm not sure if Mr. Barbado got a lot of details from that meeting from his source, who had access to Vatican files. However, we can look at a letter typed up by Mr. Gerald Light, who said he was asked to go to Edwards Air Force Base with 3 other people. One of them was Cardinal Francis McIntyre, and that they did see Air Force officials interacting with extraterrestrial beings. It was a very famous letter, and you can find it online. It was dated in like April 11th, 12th or so of 1954, and it seemed as though there was a second landing, and that Mr. Light was present. He went there with James Francis McIntyre, and there seems to be some confusion as to whether McIntyre was at the initial landing in February on the 19th and a second landing in April, but it could be that he was at both. And so this explains more why McIntyre's name keeps coming up, and he's the source for Christopher Barbado's Vatican Insider and files that he was allowed to read.
Who all was there, starting with date, time, and place?
Okay, this happened probably after 10 o'clock p.m. on the Friday night, February 19th, 1954. Eisenhower took a flight, not on Air Force One, but on a different airplane out to the desert, and he may have landed near Edwards Air Force Base and was driven from Palmdale with 6 bodyguards. I just call them the Secret Six because they were never identified. But according to a United States Air Force test pilot who was allowed to be present, the 6 surrounded President Eisenhower at all times, and no one touched the aliens, but the aliens spoke in English, were quite aware of our customs and culture, and knew that we were engaging in a rather reckless atomic bomb testing program. That was their main focus for landing, to try to talk Eisenhower out of detonating atomic bombs that were polluting the land, the sea, the air, and even sending contamination into what we would call outer space. So that these were those present, and according to the test pilot who spoke up around 1982, the aliens were very human-like, but just a little bit different, what I would call cousins of human beings.
Does that mean that they are the Nordic type with the blonde hair, blue eyes, and white skin?
A source says that when he returned to the Vatican, James Francis McIntyre took Archbishop Edward Mooney of Detroit with him to confer with the Pope, and they were given top-secret information and receiving it back from the leaders of the Vatican. But things took an unexpected turn when McIntyre and other members of this Vatican Secret Service, is what they say it essentially was, the SIV, began to have direct contact with the knowledge of the military of an alien race of Nordic-type beings from another world. They were apparently benevolent and came from the Pleiades. It says these aliens were advised to be careful with the other creatures encountered by the Americans and President Eisenhower in the California desert, and that these meetings with the members of the SIV, in other words, E.T. human contact, happened many times in the United States and twice inside the Vatican gardens near the Pontifical Academy of Science and in the presence of Pope Pius XII.
And you're quoting from?
This is a website discussing the Omega Secret.
If the tall whites and the Nordics were actively trying to keep the United States from doing anything with nuclear missiles, and perhaps the same with Russia and other places, why was the 1945 July test at the Trinity site in White Sands allowed, and why following that were Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombed with atomic bombs? Why wouldn't the same E.T.s warning the United States and others that they can't use these nuclear weapons because they're tearing into dimensions we know nothing about, and yet they did not stop the test or Nagasaki and Hiroshima?
Apparently they will give us free rein, free will to do as we wish. Whether they would step in at the point of World War III and total destruction of the planet, I don't know. I would sure hope so, and we seem to be edging closer to that every day. But I don't have any personal sources of that nature who have told me. I think when Eisenhower met with extraterrestrials, and formed a treaty that he signed on that night or in the months to come, he was trying to protect America from being disrupted by having extraterrestrials show up here, either in our skies in flying craft or landing or stepping forward and trying to speak to people. They thought it would just be utter chaos, that it would disrupt the stock market, stock would crash, and that the economy would go downhill and people would quit school, quit church, quit their jobs. So Eisenhower had every reason to ask these beings to please stay aloof and don't show yourself. I'm looking at Christopher Barbato's information. He said, my insider said the meeting was filmed by the U.S. military with 3 16-millimeter cameras placed at different points, loaded with color film and spring drive motors, and that each camera operator had to change this film every 3 minutes in the presence of the aliens because the electric motors did not work right. The technology clashed. But in total, they shot 20 minutes of film in 7 rolls, each of them 30 meters in length. Now, that's awfully detailed information to just dismiss and say, well, that's just a crackpot making this up. Christopher Barbato was skeptical at first, and through 4 years of communications with this Vatican insider who knew about the Eisenhower encounter, he felt it's quite valid and real and that the world should know, because his source within the Vatican said the world should know. So that's something to ponder. We have to be careful of misinformation and disinformation. But it's interesting, I've been reading in the last few weeks that the Vatican is currently bringing in different religious sources, religious figures, and asking them, what would be your reaction if we went public that we are being visited by extraterrestrials? Of all the subjects in the world, this is what they're gathering religious leaders from various faiths to discuss, and I find that very interesting.
We have known that is the truth since World War II. We're not alone in this universe.
Right, but the Vatican might want to be a leader, possibly, in revealing this, going public and saying, yes, we are being visited. What is your reaction? Are you going to have your faith shaken, and will your congregation or the people that you represent in your part of the world, in your faith, are they going to be shaken, or are they going to be excited and pleased? They need to gauge reaction to this. And so I think we could be getting closer to maybe not counting on our federal government to make such an announcement, but possibly from the Vatican, maybe from the Pope himself.
Paul, why didn't they announce back in February of 1954, we're not alone, we have the Vatican, we have the President of the United States, others, and we're going to have a meeting, and we're going to tell the whole world, and we're going to move into the new age of space? Why didn't that happen?
I think that Eisenhower was surrounded by those like-minded, very buttoned-down minds of his administration, and they felt it's for the best that we keep this under wraps and study it. The Gerald Light letter mentions, I heard Eisenhower is preparing a delivery for broadcast in the middle of May, that there would be some kind of announcement, but he's getting a lot of static from his people around him, the so-called higher-ups in the government and military, saying this was not a good idea.
Why? Why was it not a good idea?
I think they really felt it would just blow people's minds and frighten them, that people would run away from home or quit their jobs or disrupt society, disrupt the economy, and that this would have a very negative effect on American life. The people in charge thinking the American people like we're a bunch of children, but I think that was the mindset back then, especially based on the reaction to the 1938 War of the Worlds radio broadcast by Orson Welles, in which some people did panic, thinking that we were being invaded by aliens according to this radio broadcast they heard. So that was probably a major factor.
But that was 1938,
Right.
And we're talking about a meeting with Cardinal McIntyre in 1954, and this was after the war. It seems that if Eisenhower was of a mind that he could sign a treaty with beings that looked very much like humans, and they were the Nordics, that would have been all the reason that they would need to tell the whole world.
You would think so, but I believe national security people involved convinced him, let's not do this. And in looking through information for my next book on Nixon and Jackie Gleason, I found that one of the national security advisors with Dwight Eisenhower just before he left for Edwards Air Force Base and just after he came back was a man named Everett Gleason, who was born in Brooklyn about 10 years before Jackie. And I'm wondering where Jackie Gleason got his information. He had a lot of sources. He was obsessed with UFOs and E.T.s, and he seemed to know plenty and built his own UFO house just outside New York City. So I believe Everett Gleason may have been a source, whether he was related to Jackie or not, and that they generally decided, let's just study this a little longer and not tell anyone. And, of course, longer became longer into the Kennedy and Johnson administrations, and just tell people there's nothing to this. We're not being visited. Anyone who says they see a UFO must be crazy. That was easier to do than admit the truth and possibly trigger some sort of imagined panic.
And I wanted to share with you tonight, it is comments from the source, and I have received it in just the last couple of days now that we are reconnected in Proton Mail. And he didn't know anything about what I was going to present tonight, and I find that what he shared with me is so valuable to what I produce for you tonight. So this is quoting from the source, who had the very strange disconnect that he still doesn't understand, the insertion of the 4chan. But he now has contributed this for me to share. One thing I wanted to revisit with you is the Nordic species. Nordics are more concerned about keeping the peace in our local stellar neighborhood. What I mean is that they are more of a military type group, but not in the way you would picture soldiers in uniforms. The Nordics and the tall, pale whites have had a very long working relationship. Those two groups are responsible for the exploration and managing this stellar neighborhood of approximately 200 light years out from Earth's orbit. Draw a circle out 200 light years. That would be what he is calling the stellar neighborhood. The tall pales and whites are more responsible for injecting into our society spiritual concepts, empathy, and especially family structure, medicines, and technology at different times during our evolutionary tract here on Earth as we grew and matured as our own self-realized species of Homo sapien. Nordics will oversee certain operations and will often act as a type of police or a police force and just monitor this region of space that we are currently in. The Nordics make sure newly developing planetary original species, referred to as first world groups, have the best possible chance at evolutionary development. And in DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency reports that I have read, the Nordics seem to be the guardians of sorts over first world groups and are truly engaged in watching over developing off-world species and societies. I was once told by a DIA analyst that the Nordics have kept and still keep us protected from outside hostilities. And when I asked to explain that to me a little better, he simply said that the Nordics, the tall pales or whites, and the original grays, the ancient grays, not the clone ones, not the robotic AI ones, but that the original grays have been working together for millennia, helping new civilizations develop their evolutionary biology throughout their timeline. And I'm sharing that with you because in reading it, I feel better. I feel that what Lynn Buchanan told me years ago from the remote viewing that they had remote viewed when they were doing Project Stargate, and that there were friendlies, neutrals, and hostiles, and that the more I have learned, the more sources I have had, I am convinced that there are these species, the Nordics, the tall whites, and others, who have a vested interest in us and in this very revolutionary time on the Earth where it feels like every day, what is going to happen next? At least it makes me feel somewhat more peaceful inside, realizing that there are beings who have watched over this planet far longer than Homo sapiens sapien has existed in this universe, and that they seem to actually care about what happens in our evolutionary tract, but there is always hanging this issue of free will and how much interference will be done or not done. And is free will a huge test? Is it just to this planet, or is it a test throughout this universe? So on that score, Ian, I'm going to transition to you for questions and comments and tell everybody that I'm beginning to think that the teleprompter and I are met for different universes, and I'm going to continue from now on with my script.
Thank you, Linda. Don't worry, we're still with you. Okay, we've got the super chats here. So let me do these first of all. Moonbird.
Hi, Moonbird.
Enriquez. Traz. John McWilliams. Whisper of Love. Jessica Rodriguez. Thought on Fire 222. Hard Candy. Lily Boop. Martin Lagasse. Dr. Dolores Mise. Stephen Adamski. Sexy Sadie. Linda Emeterio. Christina Ledesma Jimenez. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, everybody. I really, really, really appreciate your support, and thank you and your enthusiasm that I'm feeling from so many people for this gathering on Wednesday night. So thank you so much. And Ian, what kind of feedback have you been seeing tonight on what I thought was trying to explain more about the strange happenings with that 4chan, and then how it has evolved into, I think, this fascinating evolution of work that Paul Blake Smith has been doing?
Well, the audience liked the interview with Paul Blake Smith very much. Renee in San Francisco says she's glued to the TV.
Yeah.
And people are commenting that it's a very interesting interview. They want to know more. For example, Sadie Veronica says she needs to know what is the connection between the Vatican, aliens, and the government, why, And can Linda explain why the Vatican has involvement in this?
That is a very good question, and I can't tonight. It is a facet that I'm working on in some ways, and I hope that we get this announcement broken sooner than later, and that it would be not just the Vatican or something with the idea that they have to get certain spokesmen of certain relevant facets of human civilization all lined up so that content is all the same, and worrying about turning it into politics, even though the revolutionary announcement that we're not alone in this universe, which seems so obvious to so many of us, it is political, and I realize that, and there may or may not be delays. But there are so many difficult and complicated facets to that I will just say thank you for the question. I am working on some pieces of it, and so in a future program, I am going to be trying to address what would be related to the evolution of avatars in Earth. So let's just say in a few weeks, I'll do this other program. What else have we got?
Okay, Linda. Steve Adamski says, why would they let Ike near a telepathic alien that could read his mind and give up military defense secrets? There are lots of testimony of how the Greys can flip through memories in your mind.
Yes, and there are through abductees as well, not just military. And these are all of the hard questions that we don't have answers to. But it reminds me what you just asked. Some of you may be familiar that Lou Elizondo went beyond the first observables and then the graphics on 5 and 6, and they kept changing. I have recently received what is called Slide 9. And Slide 9 are in these series of slides that Lou and others have put together about the UAP, UFO phenomena in all of the different categories of it being so extraordinary that it cannot be explained by human technology. And this Slide 9, Department of Defense threat scenario. The science exists for an enemy of the United States to manipulate both physical and cognitive is your brain, environments in order to penetrate U.S. facilities, influence decision makers, and compromise national security. And then there is a list of what these categories of manipulation, both physically and cognitive: psychotronic weapons, cognitive human interface, penetration of solid surfaces, instantaneous sensor disassembly, alteration and manipulation of biological organisms, anomalies in the space-time construct, unique cognitive human interface experiences, and that the DoD has been involved in similar experiments in the past, exploring these phenomena that they clearly have encountered with, they say UAP, I say other intelligences from other solar systems in this universe and our local stellar neighborhood. And DoD has relationships with renowned subject matter experts, and the DoD controls several facilities where activities have been detected, meaning that the UFO and non-human interaction, that they're saying that the Department of Defense knows that there are facilities where this kind of interaction happens, and the nuclear missile sites, the Minuteman nuclear missile sites, are one of the sites that they have known since the end of the 50s to the early 60s, that there were visible, huge craft right over missile silos, and that there have been the missiles shut down one every second at Malmstrom, and on and on and on. So essentially, it's as if now, at least, the Department of Defense, through the help of Lou Elizondo and others, that they are listing that these important words, that we're dealing with a presence, and I say it's an alien intelligence from other solar systems, a presence that can manipulate both physical and cognitive environments. And that is everything. That we're talking about the ability to manipulate everything, and that includes, so common in abductions, the complete and total paralysis of a person in bed or wherever, except for their eyes. Usually their eyes can move. And this has been part of the whole landscape of UFOs, people seeing other beings in their bedroom, being on a craft, being paralyzed sometimes on a craft back, and it is a total control of the biological human system. But on the other side, there are a lot of people in the abduction syndrome who have had these experiences, and they honestly feel that the beings that they were with cared about them in some way, wanted to make sure that something that was detected as an illness was repaired. And it may be because we are serving them in a way that we still don't understand, and they need us to be alive and to be healthy. It could be that simple. But I really do feel that, as the source said in his notes to me about the Nordics, that if we are distant family, that the manipulation of DNA in already evolving primates on planet Earth, those very words in a document that I was shown at Kirtland Air Force Base, and that some of the beings that are interacting with the planet now, the tall whites, the Nordics, the ancient tall grays that are biological and very advanced, that they want their experiments, their DNA genetic manipulation, to evolve in some way that they are cultivating. And if we're one of those experiments, it doesn't do them any good if we're not here. And so there is a vested interest in trying to perpetuate, I think, but perpetuate Homo sapiens sapien where we all share the same huge truth, that we're not alone in this universe, we're not alone on this planet, we're not alone in this solar system, and that, according to the source to me, that we have been cataloging solar systems in 22 other systems in this one arm of the Milky Way galaxy. And so even if we don't understand that there is some kind of family interests, so to speak, cousins genetically, that doesn't mean it's not true. And that we need to evolve to a place where it is open and straightforward dialogue between other beings and this civilization. I've heard the argument, well, they're too advanced. Humans and the very advanced beings, they can't relate to each other. Well, if this is a current time where that is one of the problems, it may be that the very fact that we have Space Force out in other solar systems and have had for a very long time, that everybody is learning more and more about how we finally tell humanity the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and we move into a new age in relationship and intimacy with this universe that we're in. I personally think it might help humanity to make that big step. But there are others who argue, and that's where we are on planet Earth now. The decade of revolution and strife and beings that may really, truly be trying to protect us while giving us the respect of free will. What a difficult challenge that is. So, Ian, what else do we have in questions and comments?
Well, the comments are, Christine says, Linda, this info was comforting, thank you. And Forest Lady
Good.
says, excellent info that Linda shared, and sends you a big
Good.
heart, thank you.
Good. I would like us to feel like we're getting more education that helps us want to open up to learning about other civilizations. I think that's the healthy way to go. Go ahead, Ian.
Okay, Martin Lagasse says, where do the Evens fit in all of this? Didn't they meet with Eisenhower also? And Sexy Sadie says, did Paul Blake Smith mention anything about the reptilians or how big a threat they are?
No. Paul and I have talked about many facets of his work and nothing specific about reptilians at all. About the Greys, there are so many different types. My understanding, and I'm not saying that this is definitive, I'm just saying that my current understanding is that our government, and it may have been that at Edwards Air Force Base, that had been Muroc up till 1950, and then it changed to Edwards Air Force Base, that there are tall Greys that are considered to be one of the more ancient species of the Milky Way galaxy. And maybe biological, maybe cyborgs, it's really not clear, but that there is an ancient gray civilization. That ancient gray civilization has made all kinds of artificial intelligence, cyborgs, clones, hybrids. So to say where the pure classic ancient gray stopped and started, I don't know if any human could. I don't think so. And then so there's this huge potpourri of all of these different biological and non-biologicals that are associated with the gray civilization. The tall whites, as I understand it, have been largely in this one solar system as far as our arm of the galaxy. And the 82 Eridani is where they are focused, but that they have bases, like that they have a base inside of Ganymede in this solar system, and that they feel comfortable when they are there. And this issue of which type has which vested interests and which ones has the government of the United States and other governments met with, I don't think that there's anybody who would have a clear picture on that unless it's the people who have been overseeing the evolution of records, photographs, 16 millimeter in the past, that the archive, just the sheer vast amount of material since World War II or going back to 1941, to have it archived, accessible, but only people with the highest classifications would be able to see it. It would be, to me, it would be this huge step for humanity if all of it, we could open it all up, good, bad, everything that's there, knowing that there's film, there's interviews, there's the telepathic interviews where a human is translating from a being, if it's a gray, and or a tall white, or a Nordic. Those are the types. They all are telepathic. And that for us in the civilian side, outside of me having done about 3,000 interviews since 1979 with people in, whether it was the abduction phenomenon or animal mutilations, and they found themselves taken in a beam of light in complementing with what was happening with their cattle. There's a huge range of interviews. But I have always had this overriding pulse in the back of my head in all of them that I've done, is that I'm talking with people who may physically have been on a craft in another planet, underground in this world, in the moon and beyond. But they are articulate, and they are here, and they are alive, even if they don't understand what has happened. And that many people have been taken many, many, many times. Adam Burns in New York City, who has interactions with the E.T.s and small gray and reptilians and the praying mantis, and they are taken many different times. And they find eventually, a lot of people do, that they are learning material that makes them question their relationship between the unseen, the soul, and the cosmos. And so many conversations end up on that note and on that question. We can't simply be a biological vessel, given everything that I would say the evolution of just human history has reported. And that if it is completely true that the universe is conscious, it was made, evolved, brought into being to be conscious of the other frequencies in it. Frequencies can range from what is emitted from a katydid on a spring morning to a human mind writing a symphony, and on and on. There is something about the contemplation that when we think, when we pray, when we love, when we write, when we compose, that there is a dialogue that is going with the very universe that we are in. And that if we could evolve more with less war, less violence, and less hatred, if we could evolve in that context, that eventually humanity would reach a point like the tall whites and the Nordics and others, where being able to move in this conscious universe, point to point, being able to know how to generate frequencies that would focus positive, a whole positive return in some kind of a dialogue with the universe that is beyond anything that we have been taught before. And that, to me, is part of what all of this should have as context, and that may be where the Vatican and other religions will come to be one of the interfaces with this introduction, because everything is not just money, power, greed, and war. There is so much about the humanness of getting finally told the truth. We are one species on planet Earth. In this huge cosmos, 3 trillion galaxies with all kinds of consciousness, and that it is a complicated universe, and that it is not all peaceful. But that should not scare the people in high positions on the planet to not be able to be honest with all of humanity. It seems to me we deserve it. It should not be the knowledge of just the elite. And so, in that context, what are even all of the different AI that the ancient Greys make, and you have to assume that the advanced tall whites and Nordics probably do the same thing, perhaps in a different way. They are doing this. They are cloning and hybridizing and making artificial intelligence and cyborgs because they can, because they need this kind of service on all kinds of planets, that they don't have to be at every place that they're physically investigating. And that takes, to me, it takes out some of the question about, well, what are these beings and why do they show up in bedrooms around beds, and what is the true motive? What is the true agenda? And that comes up, that question, that evolves in Glimpses Volume 1 and Glimpses Volume 2 as the high priority issues in both of those big volumes. And those two volumes are almost 1,000 pages with hundreds of images and interactions from military to civilian and on and on. As we sit here now, not having hard, firm answers to the questions, the good questions that you ask every week, there is this feeling that we need rapidly to get to a point where we are all being told the truth. And I guess that's my mantra. Ian?
Linda, can you tell people to like and subscribe, please, before we go to the next question? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, all of you. Down in the lower right, there's a little red rectangle, I think. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, because we'd love to see our 212 get up to 250 and keep evolving, 1,000. And for those of you who may be new or returning, if you like the work I'm doing, please click on that like button. What else have we got?
We've got people checking in with their own experiences. For example, we've got Dorothy Austin saying that she sees their little faces, then she's feeling like she's fallen and dropped back into her body and waking up with a scream and dropping onto her bed. And also Kelly, I guess she must be perhaps in the UK, says it is past 3 a.m. here and I can barely keep my eyes open. Has anyone else woken up to a being in their room? It happened to me almost 2 weeks ago. I so wish I knew what it was.
Can you ask her back while we're still on the air for a couple of minutes or so? What type of being? That, for all of you, whether you email me or go through Ian, to tell me which type of being that you see really helps, because I have a lot of experiential interview knowledge from talking with so many people. And so when you say it's X, Y, and Z, that helps me.
Okay, yes, Kelly, if you are there still and you're still awake, please give us more information.
But
it's fascinating that people are sharing this with us now.
Yeah, and let me insert something here. One particular aspect in the abduction syndrome that I have noticed, not everybody, but there is enough of it to be a pattern, and it's quite fascinating. And that are the people who say they may be conscious, like sitting up in bed, reading a book. All of a sudden, even though they're reading a book, they get a feeling that something has just happened, and they look up, and the next thing that they know, they feel like they are falling through the bed that they are sitting on. Or they are falling through down to where they know is the bottom of stairs. And that falling feeling that so many different people have expressed. It fascinates me because I have never read a medical analysis of what would that, if you work back from feeling like some part of you was going right through the mattress, through the floor, what would that be? I think that really intrigues me. If anybody listening tonight knows what I'm talking about or is a professional who might, I would love to hear from you. And you can email me directly at earthfiles@earthfiles.com. And Ian, what about one more question?
Okay, just hold on a second. I'm just putting one up at the moment. Okay, let's see. We've got a question here. Linda, do you know if aliens and E.T.s have developed music, art, and literature, and what do they think of ours? Do we have any reports of that?
Oh, I would love to be able to share a lot about that with you, I assume. But I do remember back in around 1985, I was working on a documentary for CBS, that was CPB, and it was a science documentary that I was producing. And I met someone who knew about my film, A Strange Harvest, but we were working on a total science project. And it took the person a while to come up and tell me, I know that you did A Strange Harvest, and I would like to just ask you something. And then out came a story about experience and abduction. And he got to a particular place and he says, has anybody ever described for you the music? These gray beings, they have a really eerie, strange music. He said, for me, it reminded me of listening to wind coming through something where it had a whistle, sort of a whistle, not a loud, but just kind of a whistling wind. And he said that was their music. And I've always thought about that. We are so insulated within ourselves that to relate to other beings and other intelligences, I find exciting. I love to learn about all things that are new and different and beyond us. And that kind of hangs in my head as one of those examples that if something like wind with a slight whistle is the music of the gray civilization, what is the music of the tall whites? What is the music for the Nordics? What is the music for the blue teals? What is the music for the reptiles? And in a funny, strange way, when you consider that up to 65 million years ago, planet Earth was completely dominated by the dinosaurs. And then now we're in a completely different world. The concept of this planet being used like a laboratory to do all kinds of science projects and genetic experimentation. It may be that we will find that is true. Well, then it might also make this a planet where if we would get on to the truth, that we're not alone, that we are ourselves a genetically manipulated species by others, that just a little further out, we would be having non-humans of all kinds, at least in the friendly and neutral, coming to Earth and going someplace else, and that Earth might actually be a crossroads if we could be told the truth. And how exciting would that be? To be able to have knowledge, public knowledge, about different beings and whatever their culture and their music and all was. I just find that there is a tremendous amount of exhilarating excitement about some of this. And I know that on the tronoloid side, the insects and Epsilon Eridani that can camouflage that they want Earth. That's the whole story that Buddy Bolton remote viewed. Again, it's the yin and the yang in this universe. But gosh, never give up and close down just because there might be some uncertainty and there may be some danger. It's been like that for humans on Earth for a long time. I hope we get the truth. I hope the Webb telescope is used to announce artificial light, whether it's going to be on TRAPPIST-1 or Proxima, and that we're going to get, the scientists are going to be able to talk about their investigations and research openly instead of everything about other intelligences being hidden underground. Never give up, and let's keep going to the light. Down with entropy, up with light. I'll see you next week.
Turn on closed captions for YouTube videos by clicking the white CC button on the lower right. The default language for Linda's videos is English. If you would like to see the captions in another language, click on the white Settings button next to the CC button. Select Subtitles CC, and then select Auto Translate. Select a language, and the captions will now appear in that language.
Sort of gone through, and they will hold their heads. I never had a cat do that before. And they'll pull against the comb, helping me get out snarls. And I think it's the best they've ever been.